What the hell is that? Oh shit, it's the Blob. Hey, welcome back to my channel. Hope everyone is doing well out there, and I hope everyone enjoyed that little video that my son and I shot for the introduction to this review. It was fun to do. Yes, I know it's cheesy as hell, and you could tell we spent a lot of money on the special effects with when the Blob drops on the car, but it was a hell of a lot of fun to do. So a shout out to my son Troy for shooting that for me. He works cheap, and he does what he's told, and he does fabulous. But it was fun to do, and here we are talking about the 1988 version of The Blob. This movie came out August 5th of 1988. Now, this film, Jack Harris produced the original Blob in 1958. This movie came out 30 years after the original. The original had Steve McQueen in it, and very low-budget sci-fi horror film back in 58. Now, Chuck Russell was from Chicago. When he moved to L.A., he was looking for a film to remake or some kind of film to get made, and he chose The Blob. So went to Jack Harris. He gave him his blessing. So him and Frank Darabont, yes, the great Frank Darabont that directed The Shawshank Redemption, The Green Mile, The Mist, Walking Dead, the first couple seasons, he was in charge of that. Fabulous filmmaker. They wrote a script, took it to Bob Shaye at New Line because they thought New Line might want to do it. Bob Shaye was not interested at all. But what he was interested in is Chuck Russell writing and directing Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3. So they offered him that. He took it, him and Frank Darabont, and rewrote the script for Nightmare on Elm Street 3, and they went off to do that film. Now, off the success of that film, they were able to parlay that into getting The Blob made over at TriStar. And they gave him a $10 million budget, according to Chuck Russell. I'm going off of what he says in interviews, because online you'll see that they say it cost $19 million. But he said in several interviews it was the $10 million budget. So I'm going off what the director says. And upon release that August, it came out August 5th of 1988, it only made a little over $8 million, unfortunately. This movie's an hour and 35 minutes long. It's a very short, fast-paced film, very tight. It's rated R, obviously. It's very gory and very violent. We'll get into that as we go along. So Chuck Russell directed this film. He wrote it with Frank Darabont. And we have Shawnee Smith in this film as Meg. She's a cheerleader in this little town. Her dad's played by Art LaFleur. He's also a pharmacist. He owns a pharmacy in town. We got Kevin Dillon as Brian Flagg. He's like this bad boy in town. You know, he's always getting in trouble. Jeffrey DeMone's in this film, and he was in a regular in Frank Darabont's films. He was in Shawshank. He was in Green Mile. He's in The Mist. He was in The Walking Dead for a few years. Candy Clark's in this film. She plays a waitress at the local diner. I just talked about her about a month and a half ago when I reviewed Cherry Falls. Bill Moseley has an appearance in this film as a soldier, about halfway through when the soldiers show up in this town. We'll get into that a little bit. And basically, at the beginning of this film, everybody in town shows like this empty town, and then they cut to the football game. Everybody in town's at this football game. And Brian Flagg, we're introduced to Brian Flagg, and they set up Meg's character. And Brian's out like on this dirt road doing trying to do jumps with his motorcycle. And there's this homeless guy out there too, like just around in the woods, scavenging with his dog. And this meteor comes out of the sky, flies overhead, and crashes in the tree line. Now, if you've ever seen Creepshow, nothing good can come from this. So the old guy goes over, and the meteor had cracked open, and there's this pink stuff inside. So he gets this long branch and gets some of it out. And he's examining it, and as he gets closer to it, it just comes right down the branch and goes on his hand. He starts screaming. Brian hears him, runs over, tries to help him. He takes off. Now, at this point, after the football game, Meg has a date with this guy who we're led to believe is the lead of it. They set him up like he's the lead of the film, and Chuck Russell pulls the old Hitchcock. He's not the lead of this film. We'll get into that in a second. And they're driving down this road, and this old guy runs out in front of him, and he kind of hits him with the car. And Brian Flagg comes running out of the tree line, and this guy's like yelling about his hand, and so they take him to the hospital. And we get our major first effects sequence here. Meg's date goes to check on the old man because the nurse put him in his waiting room waiting for the doctor. He's busy with another patient. And he goes in, he pulls back the blanket, and half the old man's gone. Like it just dissolved. It's gone. And he starts screaming. The doctor, he goes to get the doctor. Doctor comes in and goes, holy shit. And the kid goes into the doctor's office and tries to call the cops. Well, the door creaks open a little bit, and here comes the Blob. And he screams, and Meg goes to see what's going on. And we get our first major effect sequence. He's inside the Blob, and it's this pink slime over him, and he's screaming. And as he's screaming, all this blood starts coming out of his skin, and his head just kind of just disintegrates in front of her. and she screams and passes out. It's a fantastic effect. It looks amazing. God bless practical effects. I don't know what these guys had to do to pull that off, but it looks fantastic. And that's what starts, they know something's going on. So now the town's in kind of a panic, and the blob goes off and kills some other people because it basically absorbs, and the more it absorbs, the bigger it gets. And then I'm going to fast forward through a bunch of stuff. If you've never seen it, I'm going to recommend it up front. I highly recommend this movie. It's one of the best horror remakes of all time. It's right up there. I don't think it's as good as The Thing, but it's close. It's damn good. It's a fun creature feature horror film, definitely. And as the movie goes on, there's more sequences with the blob doing awesome shit. And we get this sequence in a diner. Brian and Meg are in this diner, and Kenny Clark's there. And the blob's, the sink in the kitchen's backed up. So the cook goes over and tries to open it up. Well, the blob sucks him down the drain, breaks his legs, and it's a pretty awesome sequence. And so they go, Brian and Meg go into the freezer to go away from the blob, which is something from the original film. And the blob won't go in there, doesn't like the cold. But Kenny Clark runs outside, her character, and she gets in this phone booth to call the sheriff. And the blob comes out, and it's encircling, and it's all over the phone booth, and she's screaming. And all of a sudden, she's screaming like the sheriff's name, played by Jeffrey DeMunn, and you see his body coming up as it's melting up past the glass of the phone booth. It's an awesome sequence. And all of a sudden, the glass starts to crack, and the blob just shoots in at her and destroys her body. And Chuck Russell says in the making of a video on my Blu-ray about, that was actually like a 3-foot tall phone booth. It was a miniature phone booth, and it was a doll inside dressed like Candy Clark, and he used air mortars with the blob substance they created, and they just fired it in there, and it looks amazing. It does. They pull it off beautifully. And as the movie goes on, they start to realize the blob doesn't like cold. Well, in the meantime, this government agency shows up in all white suits with this doctor who definitely you can tell has nefarious purposes. And we come to find out real quick that this was, in the original Blob, it was an alien life form from outer space. In this film, it was a biological weapon created by the U.S. government for war purposes, and it crashed down to Earth, and now it's going batshit crazy. But they don't want to kill it. They want to capture it. So they're automatically the bad guys. And Brian and Meg know this. And when they get back to town, all the military people are putting all the townsfolk in the city hall. And Meg remembers her brothers at the freaking movie theater. So we get this fantastic sequence in the movie theaters. I don't want to ruin it if you've never seen it. And then we were in the sewers. And then finally, they figure out what they have to do to kill this thing. Because this is a ski town. It's in the fall, but it's been pretty warm. They haven't had no snow. And they set up earlier in the movie about these fake snow trucks for the ski resorts. And Meg goes to get one, or Brian gets one. And then finally at the end of the film, we have a final confrontation with the blob. They blow this tanker up with the snow in it, and it freezes the blob, and that's how they kill the blob. But at the end of the film, there's this creepy priest in town, and he gets burned about 3/4 of the way through the film. And we see him earlier collect a little piece of the blob because a little bit of it gets frozen in that meat locker that Meg and Brian were in. And at the end of the film, we see him doing like this revival church service out in this field in this tent. And at the end, he's in the back, looking at himself in the mirror. You can see his eyes all white. He's burnt, half his face is burned. This lady comes in to ask him a question about Judgment Day. And he's like, oh, it's coming soon. God will give me a sign. And at the end, it just shows him lifting up a glass with this little piece of the blob in it, like wiggling around. And it cuts to black, and that's the end of the film. It's a really well done film. Chuck Russell keeps the pace moving. It does not drag at all, this film. It sets up the characters, sets up the monster, and then just lets it loose from set piece to set piece. And honestly, considering the budget and what the effects they pulled off in 1988, again, some of the effects don't hold up. There's a couple effect shots that look dated. But for the most part, a lot of the bigger effect sequences with the blob looks extremely convincing. Way better than anything CGI could have done. It looks fantastic. And I do consider this one of the best horror remakes of all time. It doesn't get enough credit. I loved The Thing, and I think The Thing's a freaking masterpiece. But I think the Blob 88's a damn near masterpiece in its own right. If you've never seen it, I highly recommend it. I give the Blob 1988 a 9 out of 10. If you've never seen it, check it out. There's a Blu-ray out from Scream Factory. There's other ways to find it. I think it's on digital for sure. If you've never seen it, check it out. 9 out of 10 for the Blob from 88. Have you ever seen this film? Leave a comment down below. Let me know. Hit the thumbs up. Hit the subscribe button. Share this video. I'd greatly appreciate that. Have a great weekend, and I'll be back next week with some more reviews. Thanks. Bye.